you doing?
Good. How you doing? Dinshaw, do we have a press table? Yeah. Or like, if they're members of the press, do we know if they're?
That's my gavel.
So your gavel too?
Yeah, they took our gavel too, son of a gun. The subcommittee will come to order. Members present will be permitted to submit written statements to be included in the official hearing record. Without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 5 calendar days to allow statements, questions, and extraneous material for the record, subject to length limitations in the rules. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and I can tell by the amount of participation in this room, this is a very important topic. And I want to thank you, to the ranking member, my colleagues, and the panel for joining us today to discuss the events in Cambodia. We are holding this hearing at a consequential moment for Cambodia with serious implications for over 6 million of its citizens, and for Southeast Asia, and for democracy and human rights in the region. Cambodia is set to hold general elections in July of 2018, which were predicted to be particularly significant for the country's progress towards genuine democracy. Recent elections, including the 2013 general elections and recent local elections, saw unprecedented gains for the Cambodia National Rescue Party and consolidated opposition movement. Many observers believe that the 2018 the CNRP would win an unprecedented parliamentary majority. Unfortunately, Cambodia's authoritarian leader had other plans. Hun Sen, the sitting prime minister, has been in power for more than 30 years and has no intentions of relinquishing power. In face of strengthening support for the opposition, it seems Hun Sen has decided that he can no longer dominate the polls, even in a rigged election system. He will retain power through force. Over the last years, his brutal consolidation of power has played out on numerous fronts. Hun Sen has chilled support for the opposition by threatening to deploy the military if elections do not go his way, and has used his control of the government to dismantle threats to his grip on power. 2 years ago, 2 CNRP lawmakers were savagely dragged from their cars and beaten by Hun Sen's bodyguards. While the perpetrators served token sentences, they were promoted to colonel barely 2 weeks after being released. Such is the reward for crushing the opposition. In early September, authorities arrested Kem Sokha, the leader of the CNRP, and charged him with treason, allegedly for participating in an American plot to undermine Hun Sen's regime. Only last month, Cambodia's Supreme Court dissolved the CNRP, again citing the party's involvement in an alleged U.S.-backed plot. The chief judge who is an ally of Hun Sen, relied on legal authorities that were created by the regime's controlled parliament this year to give the ruling party sweeping powers over competing parties. We're seeing this around the globe. One only needs to look at Venezuela. The same thing is happening there. To dismantle Cambodia's only credible opposition came amid a slew of other actions to eliminate dissent among civil society. In August, the regime shut down the office of the National Democratic Institute, a preeminent NGO that is active in promoting democracies around the world. Other NGOs have been investigated and subject to increased scrutiny. In recent months, the regime has forced the closure of independent media outlets that challenged its control over information, including Radio Free Asia, The Voice of America, and other publications and radio stations. Hun Sen's corrupt oppressive regime perpetuates a culture of human rights abuses and restrictions of political freedoms. As Human Rights Watch finds, his rule has relied on security force violence and politically motivated persecution. Security forces commit killings and torture with impunity. The politically powerful have carried out forced evictions and illegal land grabs for decades. And again, we're seeing this in other parts of the world run by other governments. Government officials and judges are mired in corruption. Hun Sen's relentless consolidation of power this year means that these widespread abuses will continue. It goes without saying that this is an intolerable situation for the people of Cambodia. The White House deserves recognition for taking decisive actions on these issues. In November, the press secretary issued a strong statement on the regime's action to undermine democracy. And this month, the State Department began implementing visa restrictions for officials involved in these actions, but more must be done. The human rights and democracy in Cambodia have broad implications for the region and the world. Cambodia is a member of ASEAN, the premier international forum in Southeast Asia, with 9 other nations, and accounts for 633 million people and $2.5 trillion in trade. Every one of its 10 members must agree in order for the bloc to act. So any nation operating outside the bounds of humanity and decency will have an outsized effect on the entire group. This is such an important issue, not just for the Cambodian people, but for that whole region and really for the world. Hun Sen and his cronies are also clients of China. Chinese aid increases Hun Sen's resilience to international pressure, perpetuates corruption within Cambodia, and gives China undue influence within ASEAN. China's support of Hun Sen's regime shows that its policies' priorities are dramatically out of step with global humanitarian norms, despite China's rapidly growing global profile. It has been a difficult year for the cause of human rights and democracy in Cambodia, and the year ahead may even be harder. So in today's hearing, we'll try to determine how Congress can best contribute to this cause. I thank the panel for helping to guide us in this important work, and without objection, the witnesses' written statements will be entered into the hearing, and I now turn to the ranking member, Mr. Sherman, for any remarks he may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So you want my gavel?
No. You keep your wedding ring. The mission of this subcommittee is so important that even another subcommittee is having hearings on Asia, namely the North Korea hearings being held by the Africa and Human Rights Subcommittee. Looking at this from a global standpoint, American resources are finite. We have a limited amount of foreign aid. We have a limited amount of preferential access that we can give to the United States market, particularly with textiles. And if the Cambodian government is unworthy of this, then perhaps we need to allocate it to poor countries that are moving toward democracy. In the past 2 decades, the United States has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in Cambodia to help it on the road to recovery and to rebuild after the costly civil war. The international community has joined us in efforts to rebuild the country and move toward democracy. In addition to what we list as the expenses, that's special access to American markets. takes jobs away from Americans, takes jobs away from those in AGOA, takes jobs away from those in South Asia. Somebody's going to be making those garments, and that is an additional advantage we give to Cambodia. Organizations such as the NDI, represented here, the International Republican Institute, Radio Free Asia, have engaged with local Cambodian partners in building a capacity for civil society. Despite this, Cambodia has been ruled continuously by Prime Minister Hun Sen and the Cambodia People's Party. Now, they were willing to share power in a coalition for years, and prospects of democracy, though, have suffered setbacks in their last 2 years because the government has adopted policies aimed at eliminating the opposition. In 2015, the Cambodian Parliament passed the Law on Associations of Non-Governmental Organizations, LANGO, to revoke the registration of certain non-governmental organizations. In August, Cambodia ordered the closure of the National Democratic Institute on the theory that it had violated LANGO. We have the president of that organization here, and you're to be commended for being effective. And that is why your organization was expelled. The Cambodian government has also ordered radio stations to stop broadcasting Radio Free Asia and Voice of America. These are vital sources of credible independent information for the people of Cambodia. Kem Sokha, the leader of the opposition Cambodian National Rescue Party, was arrested just a few months ago on September 3rd and charged with treason and with conspiring with the United States government to overthrow the government of Cambodia. We have with us Kem Sokha's daughter, Ms. Kem, who will be a witness at these hearings, and the dedication of your family to the people of Cambodia is exemplified by your father's sacrifice. The CNRP's previous leader, Sam Rainsy, remains in exile. In November, Cambodia's Supreme Court ordered the Cambodian National Rescue Party to be dissolved. And I'll point out that the charges against Ms. Kim's father are also charges against the government and people of the United States, claiming that we are trying to, quote, overthrow the government. The United States and our international partners must act quickly to stop this backsliding away from democracy. Toward that end, I've co-sponsored legislation with Congressman Lowenthal, the co-chair of the Cambodian caucus, together with Mr. Shabbat and others who are here. Our bill supports the decision announced by the Secretary of State on December 6th to restrict entry to the United States for individuals involved in undermining democracy in Cambodia, and it urges the executive branch to consider placing all senior Cambodian government officials implicated in the crackdown on democracy on the list of specially designated nationals so they are subject to travel restrictions and freezes. We don't want to hurt the Cambodian people. We don't want to disrupt our investment in Cambodian society. But we do need to reevaluate our foreign aid and our special access. And we need to turn to our European friends and remind them that they too could be providing special access to poor people in Africa or South Asia, or they could be working with a government in Cambodia that is increasingly authoritarian. We strongly urge Cambodia's government to reinstate the political opposition, release Kem Sokha, allow civil society and media to resume their constitutionally protected activities, allow NDI back into Cambodia, and release former Radio Free Asia journalists who have been arrested on dubious charges. If the Cambodian government does not take these steps and does not bring Cambodia on the path to genuine democracy, it's hard to see how the United States and our international partners could accept the legitimacy of next year's elections or continue the economic aid and concessionary trade that so many other people in countries that are moving to democracy have asked to be directed in their direction. I yield back.
Thank you for your comments, and we've had the honor and the great pleasure of having Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Ed Royce, to join us. So thank you,
Well,
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this hearing today on an issue that really needs worldwide attention and needs it now. And let me say, you know, the demise of democracy in Cambodia, the ongoing human rights nightmare in Cambodia, the violations that the Hun Sen regime is committing against basic human rights and the rule of law. This is the reason for this hearing. This is why we are so discouraged, but our hearts go out to the people of Cambodia with all they've been through, and especially since the elections back in 2013. We've seen such gross attacks on those Cambodians that peacefully oppose this growing authoritarian trend by the government. Hun Sen's regime, frankly, has become thuggish. It continues to crack down on the political opposition, arresting and beating those who speak out and oppose in any way their rule. Freedom House, you know, does an analysis every year, and it consistently rates Cambodia now as not free. But that's putting it very mildly. 2 years ago, opposition lawmaker and American citizen Noy Jamran was severely and brutally attacked by plainclothes bodyguards. And most of the world saw the photographs in the paper about what happened. They repeatedly kicked and stomped him. He was hospitalized for months. Several months later, Kem Lay, a popular Cambodian political commentator, was murdered in broad daylight. And why was he murdered? Because he'd spoken out about some of these abuses. And over the last few months, Hun Sen has dispatched any notion that democracy in Cambodia is going to continue to be maintained under their rule. They've dissolved the CNRP. They arrested its leader, Kem Sokha, who faces very spurious charges, obviously, by the government. And despite deep flaws in 2013, for those of us that were watching those elections, there were big gains made by the opposition in those elections. And since that time, we've seen a complete dismemberment of the political system in Cambodia. Make no mistake, the government is now run by an authoritarian thug. That's the unfortunate fact. The Trump administration has responded with some positive steps. Last week's announcement of the visa ban on those undermining democracy, that's welcomed. But by no means should this be the last stop. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on what additional measures we should take to support Cambodia's democracy. That's what we're calling. We're a democracy here. We're calling on other republics around the world, other democratic institutions. Now's the time to come forward. And again, I want to thank the chairman for holding this very important hearing, Mr. Yoho, on a subject that demands, frankly, our attention and doesn't get enough of our attention. So thank you again for doing this.
Thank you for joining us, Chairman Royce. It's an honor to have you here. And we are also blessed to have Alan Lowenthal, not a member of this committee, but from California, but it's very passionate. And if I hear no objection, I'll let him have 5 minutes. Hearing none, Mr. Lowenthal, you have 5 minutes, and look forward to your comments, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I'm very pleased that you call this timely hearing on Cambodia's descent from democracy. And I also want to comment on Chairman Royce. You have been a steadfast proponent and champion for democracy, and you have you've been calling for reforms and changes in Cambodia for many years, and so I want to thank you too. You know, as we've already heard, the situation in Cambodia is dire. I'm just going to go over a few things, and I think it's really important to say them again because it's really important for the United States Congress and all those that are watching to understand the importance that we play on the situation in Cambodia today and why we're holding this hearing. We're witnessing the death of democracy. You know, Cambodian democracy began in 1991 with the Paris Accord, which called for democracy, which called for ongoing free and fair elections, which have not occurred. And now we're witnessing this death of democracy, not by a single action, but in 1,000 recent cuts and 1,000 attempts by the Hun Sen regime. He's increased, as we've pointed out, the intimidation against the opposition CNRP. He's used political maneuvers to oust the former CNRP President Sam Rainsy. He's arrested the current CNRP President Kem Sokha, as we all know, and charged him with treason and removed the rest of the CNRP from their posts in the Cambodian parliament. He began a crackdown on non-government organizations, the NGOs and the independent media, all of this in anticipation of the election to eliminate all public comment and opposition to the elections next year. As was pointed out, the National Democratic Institute, Radio Free Asia, and others were forced to cease operations. Individuals related to these groups were also arrested, such as 2 RFA reporters who are now facing between 7 and 15 years in prison for charges of espionage. Arrested, the arrest of Kem Sokha by the Hun Sen regime, and who was sent when he sent armed forces to raid Kem Sokha's house and arrest him without a warrant and led him away in handcuffs. And as we know, the fictitious case against Kem Sokha, the Canadian government has implicated the United States as a co-conspirator. I think that's really important for us to understand that we have been identified as a co-conspirator in Kem Sokha's alleged crime of treason to topple the Cambodian government. He's now being held in a maximum security prison near the border of Vietnam. And also what's very troubling is that China, in a very unusual step, weighed in publicly to support the arrest of Kem Sokha. The Cambodian Supreme Court then ruled to dissolve the CNRP, and the Hun Sen-controlled parliament passed a law to redistribute the seats held by the CNRP to minority parties. 55 seats were reassigned from the CNRP to these other parties. More than 5,000 commune councillor positions won by the CNRP in the June local elections were redistributed to other minor political parties, or these people were forced to defect if they wanted to stay on to become part of the Hun Sen party. This essentially ended all political opposition to Hun Sen. Following these moves, it's to the White House's credit that it announced it would no longer support the 2018 election in Cambodia, calling it illegitimate. I think it's really critically important that we're seeing the lack of legitimacy on the part. As a co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Cambodia, along with my other co-chair, Congressman Shabbat, we've introduced a resolution, which is a companion resolution to the White House, to the U.S. Senate passed McCain-Durbin resolution, which really cites the problems that are going on in Cambodia. I think I'd just like to close and say also, I am really here to understand what are the next steps that we must do. We must support the efforts of our State Department. We must continue to educate. We must make sure that Kem Sokha is released. We must make sure that the CNRP is able to become a viable political party once more. But I think we also must, as Chairman Royce has said, we must look at ways to reach out to the world, to our EU partners, our partners in Japan, who are the big trading partners of Cambodia, and speak with one voice that the world will not allow Cambodia to descend from democracy. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, again for holding this hearing. It's critically important. You know, we spend time talking about crises in North Korea, in the Middle East. We are in danger without looking at it as a specific crisis, but an ongoing issue of losing Southeastern Asia, and especially losing the one country that was moving towards democracy, which will now be lost. And so I am so pleased with you for holding this hearing, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Well, I appreciate your comments and your input. We'll now go to opening statements from members. Mr. Rohrabacher from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. I have been deeply involved with this issue with Congressman Lowenthal and Congressman Royce. We have spent a lot of time and effort trying to do what's right over the years, and I don't think we've accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. And it's actually gone in the wrong direction, like you say. I remember when Cambodia did have hope. I remember that after we realized that the plight of the Cambodian people is something that was set in course because of America's foolish war in Vietnam. This is nothing more than an aftermath of that war. And it was a mistake for us to get into Vietnam, and the people of Cambodia are continuing to pay the price. The fact is that we know that Hun Sen was actually ferried into Cambodia on the back of Vietnamese tanks during an upheaval when trying to get rid of Pol Pot. And this type of turmoil has been a horror story for this wonderful group of people in Cambodia who deserve much more than what they've had to experience. Let me just say that America's greatest mistake, I think, was in 1993. I was there for that election, and the people actually voted against Hun Sen, and it was very clear that Hun Sen had lost the election. And our ambassador at the time decided, oh my goodness, they're threatening violence if we don't if we don't acquiesce to the demand that there be a sharing of power, and Hun Sen would be part of the sharing of power. That decision, that one decision, has condemned the people of Cambodia to oppression and corruption we never imagined. The fact is, Hun Sen, yeah, he was power sharing, and he brutally, slowly but surely eliminated all the rest of the people who were sharing power and eliminated the democratic process. Today, what we need, and I'm going to suggest this, I'd like to hear about our witnesses. We have a thing called the Magnitsky Act. Now, I happen to have voted, I think I voted for the act, but I was against the name Magnitsky because I didn't think that that had been proven in that case. However, the principle of the Magnitsky Act is exactly the right thing, and that is, let's find out the specific tyrants and criminals that are plaguing innocent people like the people of Cambodia and hold them specifically responsible, and try to find out where they put their money, where's their bank accounts, and actually find ways of putting the law against them. I'd like to have your opinion on how we might do that in Cambodia. And finally, let me just say, this, if nothing else, today we are telling the people of Cambodia we are on your side. We're telling Hun Sen and his gang of criminals that now keep him in power, we are not on your side. We're on the side of the people of Cambodia and the side of a free and democratic Cambodia, and it's time for Hun Sen to go.
Thank you for your comments. We'll next go to Mr. Chavez from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I happen to, as Alan mentioned, I'm co-chair of the Congressional Cambodian Caucus, and we've been working on this for quite some time. I want to thank him for his involvement there, Chairman Royce and many others. And as Mr. Lowenthal mentioned, there's a resolution that we're submitting today which essentially reaffirms the United States' commitment to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in Cambodia. That being said, although there were some bright spots a while back with respect to Cambodia, I have to say that under Hun Sen, we have about as far from a democracy as you can get. Shutting down independent press, suppressing opposition and civil society, threatening civil war if your party doesn't win, jailing your political opponent, and then dissolving their party, so there's essentially no opposition. That's not a democracy. And so they're jeopardizing their relationship with the United States and the West. But they think, oh, that's okay because we have China on our side. And it's not surprising because that's one of the other countries on this globe which has just about as much democracy as Cambodia does right now, which is 0. So if they want the human rights and the democracy of the PRC, that's what they're getting. And the Cambodian people deserve so much better than that, particularly when you consider the trauma that this nation has been through, where approximately a quarter of the population was wiped out under the Khmer Rouge. And so in any event, it's a terrible shame and travesty what is occurring in Cambodia right now, because it could be so much better. But this leader will not let the people of Cambodia decide who's going to control the country and who's going to rule the country and who they're like. He wants it for himself, and it's just it's a shame. But people of Cambodia know that you have a lot of friends here in this country and all around the globe that are pulling for you and what is best for you. And so we hope that this hearing will draw some attention to that. That being said, I also am the co-chair of the Congressional Turkish Caucus, and we had a meeting that started at 2 o'clock that I have to run to, but I'll be back if we get finished there. And Alan, thank you for your hard work in this area. Yield back.
Thank you for your comments. Does any other members have opening statements, Ms. Brooks?
No, sir. I'm just waiting for the witnesses.
All righty.
All right.
And we're going to do that right now. Ms. Olivia Enos, Policy Analyst at the Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for being here. Ms. Mona Kim, daughter of the person that's in jail, your father. I can't imagine how hard this is for you to be here. Deputy Director General of Public Affairs for the Cambodian National Rescue Party and daughter of Kem Sokha, President of the Cambodia National Rescue Party. And Mr. Kenneth Wallach, President of the National Democratic Institute. If you guys would, you have your timer up there. The green light is the beginning. It's 5 minutes. We'll gently let you know when time comes up, and keep your remarks there, and then we look forward to getting your information so that we can help draft resolutions and direct policies for our government to hopefully bring this situation in Cambodia to end. So with that, Ms. Enos, go ahead.
Chairman Yoho, Ranking Member Sherman, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you this afternoon. My name is Olivia Enos. I'm a policy analyst in the Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. The views I express in this testimony are my own and should not be construed as representing any official position of the Heritage Foundation. Cambodia's democracy is in peril. On September 2nd, Kem Sokha, president of the opposition Cambodian National Rescue Party, CNRP, was taken from his home, arrested, and indefinitely imprisoned on trumped-up charges of treason. Kem Sokha's arrest triggered a downward spiral. Just a month later, on October 6th, the Cambodian Interior Ministry filed a lawsuit to dissolve the opposition party. The CNRP was officially dissolved by the Cambodian Supreme Court on November 16th. In just 3 months' time, Hun Sen, the leader of the ruling Cambodian People's Party, CPP, has eviscerated the CNRP, effectively crippling the only viable opposition to Hun Sen's 32-year reign ahead of 2018 elections. Since Kem Sokha's arrest, at least 100 CNRP parliamentarians and political leaders fled Cambodia, and the crackdown on civil society is severe. Shortly after Kem Sokha's arrest, Hun Sen proclaimed that he will rule for another 10 years. The CPP's anemic electoral victory in 2013 was too slim for Hun Sen. In 2013, the opposition garnered 55 of the 123 seats in the assembly, leaving the ruling party with only 68 seats. Clearly, Hun Sen does not want to risk a potential opposition victory in 2018, which is why he has shut down the opposition long before it could become a viable threat to his 3 decades-long grip on power. Since the opposition was dissolved, the White House has stated that, quote, on current course, next year's elections will not be legitimate, free, nor fair. The U.S. government response has gotten increasingly stronger. After releasing several statements, the Department of State took concrete action by pulling U.S. support for upcoming 2018 elections, and just last week by restricting travel for individuals involved in undermining democracy in Cambodia. Congress has taken similarly positive steps to hold the Cambodian government to account. A bipartisan resolution introduced by Senators McCain, Durbin, and Rubio passed the Senate on November 17th and affirmed U.S. commitment to a democratic Cambodia, reiterated the value of the Paris peace agreements, and condemned the crackdown on civil society. The resolution also called for Treasury to consider placing all senior Cambodian officials implicated in the abuses on the specially designated nationals list. Cambodia is at a crossroads, and the U.S. government, in conjunction with the international community, should take action to hold Cambodian officials accountable. In 1993, after the defeat of the Khmer Rouge, the U.S. and 18 other international signatories to the Paris Peace Agreement agreed to ensure the right to self-determination of the Cambodian people through free and fair elections. In this regard, signatories have a continuing moral obligation to assist Cambodia when the political process falters. In my written submission, I offer several potential policy solutions to the current crisis in Cambodia. Right now, I will offer 3. First, the U.S. should consider sanctioning all individuals involved in undermining democracy in Cambodia under relevant Treasury Department authorities. Raising the financial risk to engaging in such behavior has the potential to deter future actions that erode democracy. Potential mechanisms could include invoking the Global Magnitsky Act, which allows individuals to be targeted on human rights and corruption grounds, or by placing individuals on the specially designated nationals list, as was recommended by Senate Resolution 279. Second, the U.S. government should consider forming a Cambodia contact group comprised of key signatories to the Paris Peace Agreement. These signatories could include the U.S., Japan, Indonesia, Australia, the UK, and France. Japan, in particular, has a critical role to play, but has thus far not done much in response to recent events in Cambodia. Given the severe deterioration in democracy there, the group should reassemble to provide accountability and develop plans to get Cambodia back on the path of political reform. Third, and finally, the U.S. should continue to publicly and privately press for the release of Kem Sokha. The U.S., along with other partners such as the European Union, should draw attention to threats to democracy in Cambodia. Calling for Kem Sokha's release is the surest way to do that. In particular, statements from high-ranking officials, such as the Secretary of State or the Deputy Secretary of State, may deter Hun Sen from further degenerating democracy in Cambodia. Thank you for your time and attention. I'm now open for questions.
Thank you for your comments there. And now we'll go to Ms. Kim. And, you know, I know this has got to be a hard thing, you know, talking about this in this front of this committee with your father, Kem Sokha, incarcerated right now. So I'd love to hear from you, and thank you for being here.
Chairman Yoho, Ranking Member Sherman, and members of the subcommittee, thank you so much for this opportunity to testify today on the fragile state of Cambodia's democracy and the important role that the U.S. can play to protect the political rights of the Cambodian people in the lead up of our national election, which is scheduled for July 2018. 26 years after the signing of the Paris Peace Accord, Cambodia is once again facing a historic crossroads, which 2 options present. 1, restoring democracy, or descending into downright dictatorship. The fundamental elements of the Paris Peace Accords have been violated by the ruling elites, and some of those recent violations include: number 1, the November 16 dissolution of the main opposition party, the CNRP, and the theft and redistribution of our 55 seats in the National Assembly to unelected smaller parties. Number 2, the unconstitutional and midnight arrest of the opposition leader Kum Sokha, my father, without warrant by heavily armed police raided into his house after midnight that violate his parliamentary immunity, that echo the terrifying tactics and divisive rhetoric of Cambodia's darkest past, the Khmer Rouge. And number 3, the banning of 118 CNRP leaders from participating in politics, and the removal of about 5,000 of our commune councillors who were just elected earlier this year in June. And number 4, the crackdown on independent media and civil society, most brutally, the broad daylight assassination of the political analyst Dr. Kaim Lay. Democracy and freedom are American values that echo universal ideas. I believe your country's bedrock values resonate well with the Cambodian people's desire for change that's felt by all Cambodians of all walks of life. And it is not only the moral responsibility of the U.S. to protect democracy and human rights in Cambodia, I believe it is also in the U.S. interest. The U.S. benefits by staying engaged in Asia to uphold the international rule-based order that underpins the global commerce and international security. So it is both in your interest and in protecting your values. The U.S. has already sent a clear signal, I believe, to the Cambodian government in holding them responsible for the regression. I want to thank both houses of Congress. I want to thank the White House, the State Department, especially for the banning of the visa ban that was placed last week, and also the continuous call for the release of Kum Sokha without condition and of other political prisoners for free and fair election in 2018. But it is important now that the U.S. placed and forced a deadline. It is very important to place a deadline with the Cambodian government. If the Cambodian government does not reverse course on time, as soon as possible, I believe further action needs to be taken by the U.S. And that includes, number 1, placing individual targeted sanctions on Cambodian government officials that have been identified as undermining democracy through the Global Magnitsky Act or on the SDN list as recommended by the Senate. Number 2, suspending any and all assistance that go directly to central Cambodian government, including security-related assistance as proposed by the Senate State and Appropriation Operation Bill. Number 3, continue to provide democracy assistance to civil society, especially the NGOs that work on election-related matters. Number 4, reviewing Cambodia's eligibility for the generalized system of preferences and sending a notice of that review as soon as possible to the Cambodian government so that they have incentive to backtrack. Number 5, coordinating with like-minded countries and entities such as Japan, the EU, Australia, and South Korea to use their leverages in calling for the Cambodian government to reverse course. And finally, number 6, convening key signatories of the Paris Peace Accord to organize a synchronized global response to the Cambodian government because they have been attacking all the elements of the Paris Peace Accord. The current oppression, I believe, if allowed to continue, will generate political instability because oppressed dissent tends to boil over. And then eventually that will lead to economic instability as well. So I urge you to remain resolute in your calls for the release of Kum Sokha and other political prisoners for free and fair election in the 2018 in Cambodia. And I believe Cambodia is worth your attention and action because this crossroad actually represents an unprecedented opportunity that the country has not seen for decades. Big changes can happen, and we are an inch away from it. Democracy is very much possible, and it can happen very soon, and the U.S. can play a big role in helping Cambodia telling an inspiring story to the world that democracy can persist. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate it, and you coming here testifying, that gets that message out to the world, and we'll help you with that. Mr. Wolak, from the President of the National Democratic Institute, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Sherman, thank you for this opportunity to testify before the Subcommittee on Developments in Cambodia. I'm honored to appear here with Mona Kem. She and her imprisoned father are courageous champions for democracy in Cambodia. And let me summarize my written testimony with these comments. As has already been said here, the recent action by the Cambodian government and the ruling CPP to dissolve the opposition CNRP effectively transformed the country into a one-party state. The arrest of Kemko Sokha, the leader of the CNRP, on spurious charges, the banning of over 100 opposition leaders from political activities, the arrests of political activists, and the crackdown on independent news media and civil society have isolated the country and put its further development in serious doubt. These and previous actions by the Cambodian government are a clear violation of the spirit and letter of the 1991 Paris Peace Agreement, which ended the nation's 12-year civil war. That agreement, which Momina referred to, was signed by 19 governments, including the United States and China, and required Cambodia to respect human rights and called for Cambodia to follow a system of liberal democracy on the basis of pluralism. And I would recommend strongly a rereading of the provisions of that important document. When the 1991 Paris Peace Agreement was signed, Cambodia was emerging from decades of war, the genocidal Khmer Rouge regime, and the Vietnamese occupation. The country was economically devastated and the institutions of governance weak or non-existent. In some areas, much progress has been made, largely due to the hard work by thousands of Cambodians and international donors. The U.S. has played a major role in the country's development, funding projects in the fields of agriculture, education, and public health, and strengthening the electoral system, rule of law, political parties, and civil society. NDI has focused its efforts in Cambodia on developing governance and building a more democratic political party system. Since 1992, NDI has sponsored hundreds of community-level multi-party dialogues, offering villagers the opportunity to engage in local governance, sponsored election campaign debates, and assisted citizen organizations to monitor the elections. We have also carried out programs, and I emphasize here, with both the ruling and opposition parties alike, to participate in elections, monitor polling, develop greater opportunities for women and youth, and build more democratic party structures. Since the transitional period began in 1991, the ruling CPP has dominated the political landscape, maintaining control of the police, the military, civil bureaucracy, and virtually all of local government. However, the peace accords spawned a large number of civil society groups which were able to operate at times with a surprising amount of freedom. Political parties, too, have had some space in which to operate. Although the government used civil defamation suits, the party registration law, and the filing of criminal charges to keep the opposition off balance. At the same time, Cambodia's political history since the Paris Peace Accords can be characterized as a period marked by three distinct coups. The first coup occurred when the results of the 1993 elections conducted by the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia, UNTAG, were in effect overturned by the CPP, as Mr. Rohrbacher pointed out. The second occurred in 1997 when Hun Sen brutally and violently overthrew his coalition partner, Fun Sen Pek, and forced the opposition into exile. The third coup, of course, occurred this year when the government disbanded the CNRP, the only opposition party that could effectively challenge them. The opposition strength was clearly growing, as has been noted here. In the 2013 national elections, the CNRP made a strong showing, increasing their seats in parliament by nearly 50%, while the CPP saw their representation decline by 25%. In the election's aftermath, the CPP-led government became increasingly repressive, stepping up actions against civil society and the political opposition. Its motivation was obvious. The CPP's own internal polling, leaked to the press, showed the ruling party facing stiff opposition in the upcoming local and national elections, and I would suggest reading some of the questions in that poll that are included in my written statement. They actually foreshadow the exact actions taken by the CPP. Commune Council elections were held last June, resulting in a strong showing for the CNRP, which won 44% of the total votes cast. On August 23rd, NDI received a notice from the government ordering it to close its office and withdraw its international staff from the country within 7 days. The Voice of America, the Radio Free Asia were also shuttered, as were dozens of local broadcast stations which carried VOA and RFA programming. The Cambodia Daily, the independent English language newspaper that had been operating since 1963 was forced to close. The government's actions are clearly designed to maintain at any price the ruling party in power. They also place Cambodia more firmly in China's orbit. And while the Cambodian government was widely condemned by the international community for its recent repressive measures, China was quick to offer support, ignoring the provisions of the Paris Peace Agreement to which it is a signatory. I want to recognize the actions taken by the U.S. government in terminating assistance to Cambodia's election commission and imposing visa restrictions on those Cambodian officials responsible for undermining democracy. These actions are important because they demonstrate that concrete measures will be taken unless certain conditions are met. Let me just summarize by recommending possible other actions that could be taken. Number one, the withdrawal of all but humanitarian aid to the government of Cambodia. Two, continued support of non-governmental organizations within Cambodia. Three, altering the terms of trade with Cambodia. The U.S. is the largest export market for Cambodian goods, receiving 25% of Cambodian exports. The EU is the next largest. This provides leverage for inducing positive change. Four, increase international pressure and dialogue. Following the 1997 coup, an informal diplomatic network known as the Friends of Cambodia Group helped Hun Sen and the political opposition come to an agreement on conditions under which the exiles would return to Cambodia to participate in national elections the following year. The UN withheld recognition of the government at that time, and similar moves might help pave the way for new negotiations. And finally, supporting the return of exiled political leaders. The CNRP remains a legitimate political force within Cambodia. However, over 100 opposition leaders and elected officials are in exile. As in 1997, continued support should be provided to the exiled opposition to help them convene and to communicate with their supporters and the international community. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony, all of you. I appreciate it. Everybody's brought up the elections of 2013 and the elections last summer, this past summer. It resoundingly showed the will of the people, is what we saw with the numbers that are favoring the growing popularity and the growth of the CNRP. I think this speaks loudly, but what we're seeing is we're seeing the world divide diametrically opposed philosophies with Western ideologies. The universal principles, and Ms. Kim, you brought up what we believe here in America. But I think if we all look at people around the world, and I've had the opportunity to speak to people all over, there's innate beliefs that we all have. Liberty, freedom, self-will, self-determination. Those are universal beliefs that I believe, my beliefs are that everybody has those in the world. Where we start dividing this or start preventing this is when you have authoritarian governments. And, we look at the beliefs that we have here that government is by the people to serve the people versus the authoritarian type that we're seeing, especially with the rise of China after the 19th Congress, where Xi Jinping said the era of China has come and it's time to take the center stage of the world. And I just read an article where they said the purpose of the citizens, their sole purpose is to serve the government. In our form, we have the government is there to serve the many, whereas their people are to serve the government of a few. And we know those regimes don't last long term. And saying that, I look at the amount of aid we've given Cambodia. My figures show from 1993 to 2016, aid to Cambodia was $1.7 billion in aggregate aid, $1.7 billion. A lot of this goes in the name of good governance, the building democracies, and it's something that we can't wish upon another country. But we know it works pretty darn well here. It has for the last 226 in our constitutional republic. And it's something that we know, again, the innate feeling of people everywhere want what we have. And so we've invested in this. What I would like to know from you is what programs have you seen work the best? And we'll start with you, Ms. Kim. Your feelings with the investment that we've made, the American people have made. What's your opinion on where we should keep going or should we just pull back and pull back everything?
Thank you, Chairman, for the question. I think what's most helpful so far in Cambodia is democracy program that involve directly citizen participation. I can give one example of the Cambodian Center for Human Rights, which was funded and I believe still funded partly by USAID in some form. So any program that work directly in encouraging people, empowering people to understand their rights, to stand up for their freedom. And also, I would say number two, because of the timing of the election, any program that work with NGOs that work on election-related matter, whether it's investigation, monitoring of election.
Is that possible now that he's cracked down on everything, you know, and gotten rid of the opposition party? Is that possible to do that in that country?
There is still a few effective organizations, for example, COMFREL. They work on election, and I believe that their job is extremely important as the presence of the opposition. They are an election watchdog, and their work has been significant. For example, in 2013, without their documentation, we would not have known all the
Their job may be easier in the next election, right? Because there's no other party other than the one he's going to allow run.
In the case that there will be election, we want to be prepared that these watchdogs are equipped with the right knowledge and right tool to do their job.
All right, given the actions of Hun Sen and the regime has taken against the CNRP, what is the opposition's current plan of action?
We have two things, really. We have the Cambodian people inside the country, but as of right now, there's very little they can do because of physical threats, really. So another channel for us would be through the international community, and I believe in the Cambodia context, the donor community has more of an obligation than any other country because of the Paris Peace Accord binding. So for us, we will continue to advocate for the reinstatement of our party. And again, timing is of essence. If there's no solution soon we're talking about the end of this year, or the latest, I would say the end of next month, then any possibility of free and fair election is impossible. Then we would have to rethink. So what's next? And I think the international community and the Cambodian people together will pave a way for us to go back to restore democracy.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to the ranking member and let him ask his questions. Thank you.
Ms. Kim, how would you describe the current thank you. The current status of your father, Kem Sokha, the head of the CNRP. We know he was arrested on this ridiculous charge of treason. And how can the United States and the international community work to ensure that he is treated justly and released?
So far, I believe that they deny any visit access from outsider. The only people that can visit him is my mother and his lawyers. He's kept in solitary confinement, and he has no access to the outside world except through my mother. And I believe what the U.S. can do is continue, the U.S. and its allies, meaning the EU, Japan, and the other countries, is continue to press for at least a visit to see how he's doing. And also to communicate already to the Cambodian government about any repercussions should they mistreat him. I think that's very important to preempt.
Has he been denied medical attention or pharmaceuticals?
So far, I believe a group of doctors has seen him once.
Mr. Wallach outlined a number of steps that we would consider. I think it's now time for us to step up to the business community in the United States and hopefully get European governments to do the same and Japanese governments to do the same, to put an American law that says if we decide to forego this special access to U.S. markets, that any company buying garments from Cambodia can immediately void its contract. So we can put that in as a matter of law, that is deemed by law to apply to any contract, and we can demand that no U.S. company can sign a contract in the future that doesn't specify that, so that there's no doubt that it applies. That would have the effect of putting every garment manufacturer in Cambodia on notice that their contracts are hanging by a thread. Ms. Eunice, how dependent is Cambodia upon its ability to export garments and to Europe, Japan, and the United States?
Well, I would say that one of my concerns with pursuing this type of strategy would be that it has the potential to harm the Cambodian people more than to directly address the government.
Keep in mind, it dramatically helps the people of Africa, dramatically helps the people of South Asia. We're only going to buy a certain number of shirts. And I know your focus is on helping the people of Cambodia, but here's what we give to Cambodian manufacturers: undermines democracy in Cambodia and takes jobs away from sub-Saharan Africa. Again, Mr. Wallach, do you have an answer on just how dependent the Cambodian government is?
They're very, very dependent. My only recommendation would be on these issues of sanctions. And
notice, I wasn't saying sanctions. I was saying let us have contractual provisions so that if in the future we have sanctions, we don't have American companies in violation of contracts. Go ahead.
My only recommendation would be, as we did in South Africa, as we do in Venezuela and Cuba and other places, is to consult with local Democrats, those in Phnom Penh and those outside the country.
Including ones sitting next to you, yes.
Exactly, to hear their views.
Yeah, but I mean, the next step is to be
guide
legally prepared and move forward. That sends a message, and hopefully will result in the changes, because we propose steps we can take against individuals. Well, I'm not sure they want to go to Disneyland, and even if they do, they can go to Shanghai. We talked about cutting off foreign aid. I'm not sure that will get the attention. Their focus is on maintaining power. So we have to at least prepare the ground for something that goes beyond that. And now, NDI has been kicked out. Is IRI still operating in Cambodia?
Well, IRI did not have international staff in Cambodia at the time.
Are they moving in to fill in for you?
Well, I doubt whether that would be the case, because they've been under.
So it's not like they're just going to go after the D. No. They're willing to go after the organization affiliated with the President's Party as well.
Yeah, they have been attacked rather vociferously over the last few months as well.
I yield back.
Thank you. We'll next go to Mr. Rohrbacher from California.
I think that, well, number one, we're sending a message by this, as I mentioned in my first 5 minutes, and it's important that that message is very clear. Hun Sen has got to go. The United States is on the side of the Cambodian people who want a more democratic and honest government, and that's that. That's the number one message. So number two about this hearing, maybe we can get down to some brass tacks on something that we can do. And let me just say, after my long period of time, that I have been friends of the Cambodian community here and the Cambodian people. One thing that I'd like to send to them is, America just can't do it for you. This is not going to be a gift. Every time I talk to my Cambodian friends, they're saying, well, when are the Marines going to come and get rid of Hun Sen so we can then take over the government and have free elections? It ain't going to happen. So we've got to find, that's the number two message. Don't wait for the American military might to displace Hun Sen. So what's the third step? So what do we do with Hun Sen? What do we do? What is the exact pattern? Ms. Kim, you gave some very good suggestions there. I'm going to get into a little detail on it now. Maybe we should have, Mr. Chairman, a list of individuals in the Cambodian government and corporations, both individuals and corporations that are from other countries, who are there profiting from the corruption of the Hun Sen regime. And there should be some kind of economic sanctions on them. It's like the Magnitsky Act, so to speak. Now, right now, there's a lot of, for example, there's big problems I know of in Cambodia where people's property is being stolen and it's being handed over to cronies of Mr. Hun Sen. So, both national and international cronies, I might add. So thus, we need a list from you. We need the Cambodian community to provide us the list of specific corporations and individuals, and then we can work on legislation that will require our State Department to investigate these particular individuals, and basically will be able to tell us, does this person deserve specific sanctions? Like what I say, this is a sort of the Magnitsky Act, but I think it goes beyond that because this is just simply a situation where also we're talking about economic crimes as well as political crimes, and as well as just regular criminal activity by people in murdering their opposition. So if you can give us, let's say out of this hearing that we get a commitment to get some names of people that we then can ask for and legally require our State Department to do an analysis of what that particular person has done and to verify that it would be justified for sanctions against the individual. So that's one thing I would hope would come out of this today. And and again, let me just say that it's not only the United States who ain't going to do it for you, it's not Japan is also not going to do it for you. We need to, we also need this to see some signs of some resistance among the Cambodian people to their government. It's not their government. If it was their government, we wouldn't want resistance to it. It's a clique that's holding power by force and corruption, and they are not your government. They are they're gangsters, and we need to recognize that, and gangsters understand two things: brute force and a deal. Now I want to ask you one last thing about the deal. I want your opinion on this. Maybe the only way, I remember about 20 years ago, I sat across from Hun Sen at a table, and I told him, I said, you know, we're all getting a little older here, and we want to have time to enjoy our lives. I'll make you a deal. I will retire from Congress if you will retire from being the president of Cambodia. He didn't take me up, and I'm here too. So there we go. But maybe we could, again, maybe some people should approach Hun Sen and just give him the deal. And I would like your opinion on this. Should we offer Hun Sen a deal? This happens with all tyrants, by the way, that says, get out of town and you can keep your ill-gotten gains. We're not going to bother you, but get out of there. And as compared to if we don't, we say, no, the only way you're going to get out of there is if we kill you, or if we capture you and put you in a cage. That guy's never going to go in that voluntarily. So what do you think about the offering Hun Sen a deal? Get out of there, let the people have democracy, and you will be free from being prosecuted. Just a short answer from each of you, please.
Sure. I think the critical role of the U.S. government is to restore freedom to the Cambodian people. And so I think strengthening democratic institutions is probably the best way to do that. And I think that holding accountable individuals, including Hun Sen and other individuals within the Cambodian government, is the best way to do that. I don't know that we need to offer him a specific deal. I think we just need to put pressure on key nodes and facets of democracy in Cambodia.
So you would oppose the idea of just offering him a deal. Get out of town, get out of town, and we'll let us get on with our freedom. What about you, Ms. Kim?
First of all, I agree with the list of individuals and corporations that are undermining democracy in Cambodia, and we will happily provide you with that list. In terms of the deal, I think right now he's not ready for a deal. You need to corner him first, and then he will propose a deal himself.
Okay.
So first,
But what
start
if he proposes the deal? Let me get out of town with my money. And
he's not, his current, her current state of mind is not about receiving a deal yet. It's about crushing the rest of the opposition
sure,
that's left.
the secret is we want to get him to the point where he's either going to ask for a deal or we can get rid of him ourselves. But you're sort of hedging a little bit here.
No, I don't think I'm hedging.
You say yet. We don't want to offer him a deal yet.
When he's ready to
Okay.
make a deal, he will offer the deal. Right now, I think what's important to put pressure on him. I agree with Olivia, and I think maybe I'm more optimistic than some of you. I believe that individual targeted sanction alone will likely be enough. You may not have to pull the nuclear option of removing Cambodia's trade privileges. I really strongly believe that. So let's just start with the individual financial sanction that will put tremendous pressure. And I must say, even the visa ban alone, it impacts them a lot. It's not just about Disneyland.
All right.
It's much more than that. It makes their life difficult. And if you move on to financial sanction, I think that alone will have enough impacts for them to reconsider.
Usually people, when they're in, gangsters, I'll just say, usually gangster regimes understand a deal when there's a gun at their head. But that's another issue. What about it?
Well,
Should we offer him a deal or not?
It may not only be the Prime Minister. There is more than just an individual. And I'm a big believer in institutions and processes, and I like to believe that these types of deals would be entered into by democratically elected governments, that they have the right and the authority and the legitimacy to deal with those that their non-democratic predecessors.
Or whatever deal would be offered if there was and I'm not, by the way, advocating that necessarily, just was interested in your opinion, but it has to be something that could be then accepted by the democratically elected government.
And I think broader negotiations are necessary, but because I think it is beyond just one individual. I think you have the military, you have the deep state, you have other aspects of the political system that would have to be part of a negotiated settlement.
Right. Thank you.
Maybe we can get him a signed copy of The Art of the Deal. Mr. Lowenthal?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd just like to say I have a deal for you, too. I think I really like the direction that we're going in. We're trying to figure out what can we do now. And I think that's critically important. And we're seeing there is no easy silver bullet to do it. We've talked about increasing what the State Department sanctions are by looking at increasing sanctions on individuals, on businesses that engage in these behaviors. I think that's very appropriate to look at. I'd like to raise some other things that I've heard so far this morning to really talk about where we can go. One is it possible, and I'd like to understand more, how do we do to reconstitute the Paris Agreement? There were all the signatures, there were 15, we were one of the signatories. All of the people that we're talking about also signed the Paris Agreement that they would ensure free and fair elections and move. What do we do now? What do we do now to make sure, and is there a path to do it? I'd like to hear from you, and that's my first question. Is that an option, and how do we do that? Anybody want to choose to answer it? Ms. Enos.
Sure. I think that, already there are ambassadors from several of the signatories to the Paris Peace Agreement that do meet together to sort of convene. I think we should sort of raise the profile of this and perhaps have foreign ministry level officials come together and talk about what are the long-term as well as the short-term steps to ensuring that Cambodia gets back on track.
Do you see us as a Congress writing to our State Department and asking them to reconvene or to raise this issue with the foreign ministers, possibly our UN ambassador also raising? Because I'm trying to figure out how do we get there. And so that's a very good, so we need some mechanism to reach these foreign ministers of the countries that have already signed the signatures to see what they think, how we can work together and to reach. So that's one.
An alternative to
Yes.
is the Friends of Cambodia group that was brought together following the 1997 coup.
Okay.
That group supported the negotiations that ultimately led for the then UCD opposition to return to Cambodia. And I think even before that, however, what is necessary, the opposition right now, the leadership of the opposition, aside from being in jail, are scattered in Australia, Thailand, the United States. International support has to be extended to them so they can communicate to the international community. This is a coalition. This is not a single party. And they have to communicate with their supporters in the country. They have to communicate with the international community. Right now, the government is the only body that is communicating at multilateral settings. And they have to begin discussing and convening to discuss how they would return to Cambodia, under what conditions. And the international community, Friends of Cambodia, can help that happen as well.
I'm actually exploring myself the path to revive the spirit of the Paris Peace Accord, and I believe it may fall under the jurisdiction of the UN Security Council. So I am trying to meet with the missions at the UN who have membership in the permanent membership in the National Security Council, and I think they have the authority or some more, I would say, more obligation about reviving the Paris Peace Accords. So I think that's one way to look at it, and I agree with Olivia about at least you can convene foreign minister level of the key signatory. Doesn't have to be all the countries. And right now, even on ambassadorial level, it's not that coordinated yet. So I think that's the message that each government, or the U.S. government, and I believe maybe the French government as well, can start to look into.
Following that, talking about this international consortium, whether it was through the Paris, and I think it was you, Mr. Woloch, talked about trade. Now, we've talked about individual sanctions from the United States, but I think also you mentioned that the vast majority of Cambodians' exports go to either the United States, the EU, or to Japan. How can we use that as leverage, that kind of trade that goes in terms of trade agreements or other things? Maybe you can explain, or anyone else, how do we, the leverage that we have is that we're buying all their goods. It's not just from the bad folks. We're buying all the Cambodian goods, EU, United States, and Japan. How do we use that? Do you have some ideas?
Well, I'm not a trade expert, but what I would recommend, there are a lot of options of how to tie trade in. The international financial institutions, by the way, put a number of loans on hold to Cambodia because of land expulsions. They then extended it a little later, and they came under criticism. So the international financial institutions have a role to play here too when it comes to investment opportunities in the country. But I think on the trade issues, there are a variety of options, but I think this is an issue that requires consultation with the Cambodians first before we get into how to do it, to determine what they feel comfortable with so it doesn't harm the Cambodian people. And different democratic forces in different countries take different positions on this issue, but I think they should be sort of the driving force in the types of recommendations that they would make to the international community on the issues of trade.
I think you can first start by the reviewing process. Reviewing, identifying the violation, and then do a recommendation and communicate that very clearly and strongly to the Cambodian government. And again, I am optimistic, and I think that alone will be enough. And it's not, I wouldn't call that a bluff or a threat either. It's just preparing ground if you really need to pull it. If the actions by the Cambodian government really violates those terms and conditions of the trade, then you may have to pull to cancel the trade. But I think reviewing, it's very important to start the reviewing process. And I urge the same thing with the EU as well. Both the EU and the US can start reviewing the trade privileges and the violation that the Cambodian government is conducting.
I think it's critical that we be as targeted as possible in what we're reviewing and what we're thinking of doing in terms of action toward Cambodia. One of the concerns that I have with doing sort of like a broader trade review, which I agree with Mona, it would be good to review it, but to actually revoke all those trade preferences is that it's not clear that it's a direct response to threats to democracy and human rights. When you target specific individuals, when you review democracy assistance, you're considering things that are directly relevant to the challenges at hand. And I think that sends a much clearer message that U.S. policy will respond in kind to the ways that there are violations that are occurring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do I have any time left, or if not?
Go ahead.
Thank you. The one other question is, I've also talked about, we do provide a significant, I think the chairman mentioned the amount of aid that we've given in terms of foreign aid over. But it seems to me, in my understanding, I'd like to hear from the panel, that U.S. foreign aid primarily has gone to NGOs and to organizations trying to bring about change in Cambodia rather than directly to the government. And that if we look at restricting foreign aid, it may not impact the government as much as those people that are already seeking democracy. So I'd like to know, do you see that as something that we should be very much aware of if we move in that direction also? And I'd like to hear your comments on that.
I think it's critical that if we're going to do a review of our democracy programming, that we make sure that we keep in place programs that encourage the development of civil society and encourage the development of democratic institutions. I think it is true that a lot of the aid does go toward NGOs, and this brings me to one point that I think is critical. Even though the U.S. has withdrawn support for the 2018 elections, I think it's still critical that some of these election monitoring NGOs be allowed, possibly even encouraged, to operate just without U.S. assistance, because I think we need to be able to get a pulse on how, to what extent democratic institutions in Cambodia have regressed, and also to sort of get a pulse on what is the public opinion in Cambodia toward Hun Sen, toward the CPP. And I think if you don't have election monitoring organizations from the U.S. or from other Western governments there, you will lose that critical insight. But even still, I think that is still reason to review our democracy programming in Cambodia and make sure that it is achieving the outcomes that we want and that it's bolstering the right institutions, not being diverted, because aid is always fungible. So
thank you.
Watch that.
I would say that do not underestimate your leverages. If you look at, was it last month when the U.S. announced it's pulling support from for demining for the National Commission, CMAC, I can't think of the full name now, and giving that money instead to NGO who also work on demining, that alone got the Cambodian government panicking. So, and that's only, I believe, 2 million a year. You think that's a very small number of money, I mean, in the U.S. context. But I believe that the aid that go directly, I'm talking about the one that go directly to central Cambodian government, if you cut that, it will have an impact. Sure, they will supplement that either from China or from other sources, but that would still hurt them and hurt the Cambodian government itself, and would have to reconsider. I think they will have to reconsider their action. And I agree with Olivia also that the U.S. should still continue to monitor the electoral environment in the case that the election go forward, and regardless what kind of election we would have in 2018. So I think election monitoring program is still very important, because you want to document what's going on, to have an opinion on it, regardless of the circumstances.
I would just add that monitoring the election process by citizen monitoring groups does not necessarily legitimize the process. Rather, it legitimizes themselves. And so the worst thing is to withdraw assistance, so they're under extraordinary pressure by the government. It would be even worse if the international community suddenly withdrew support for these groups. There are many other areas in assistance that we have provided Cambodia over the years. We funded projects in the field, as Mona said, in demining, but also agriculture, education, and public health. We've helped develop a labor framework and a $100 million travel industry. We've supported Cambodia's cultural heritage. So there's a myriad of programs, I think important programs over the years, that have had some important impact, and those, I think, can certainly be reviewed.
Thank you. And just as I yield back, I would just like to say, you have, in addition to the statements that you've done at the beginning, you have provided us with a number of specific recommendations. It would be very helpful if you could provide those to the committee or to members of the committee, because really that's where the next step is, and we're trying to figure out what is the next step, and you have a wealth of information that you've provided us, and I would like it as concretely as possible to provide to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your extra input. We allowed people to go over extra because we're down to a few people, but it's more engaging this way and we're getting more information out. We're going to go back to Mr. Rohrbacher. He has some comments.
Just a couple thoughts, and if we have a list of names of people that should be investigated and to see if they're engaged in human rights abuses, but also in total corruption and harmful corruption to their society, those names should be provided to the chairman of this subcommittee. He has a staff, and we've just talked about it, and the staff will look at that and make sure that we follow through with legislation, and talking to the State Department. Then you have the staff here would be able to follow through and make sure we get something done there. Second of all, about general sanctions versus specific sanctions. I'm sorry that when you have a dictatorship, do you think that Hun Sen would give a damn about whether or not some people were being hurt down in his country by a sanction? Think he does? No. Why should he? He, in fact, his gang is buffeted. They're not going to not have an extra bowl of rice because of sanctions. They've already got their money, and whatever income is going on, they're the ones who are ripping off the profit of the whole country rather than having it become part of the ownership of the people. And number two, of course, if there were any sanctions that did general sanctions, another monstrous gangster regime called Beijing will step in and take care of, oh, well, we'll come in and do this. And I'm sorry, all the really good industries that you were talking about that were I am sure that it's Hun Sen's buddies that have got the permits to operate those particular businesses. That's the way it works. And it's, again, you got to hold people accountable. I do think the people of Cambodia will reach a breaking point where they will have to, at some point, say we're going to be engaged in something that will force Hun Sen out. And we can't just rely on other people, whether they're Japanese Americans or ASEAN friends or whatever. The people of Cambodia either going to stand up to Hun Sen and kick his butt out of there, or he's going to continue in power. We can put even to what I'm suggesting by holding specific people accountable for their crimes. And I don't think that will result in Hun Sen running off, unless, of course, a deal is made, which, of course, we thought about that too. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for both of your input.
Thank you to the witnesses as well.
Thank you. Let me ask you real briefly, how effective is Radio Free Asia, Voice of America, or other transmissions into Cambodia, in your opinion, Ms. Enos?
Radio Free Asia and Voice of America are critical to ensuring that democracy continues to flourish in Cambodia. They provide an alternative news source, and they help to encourage the sort of domestic news sources that are already there. So I think it is really a shame that Radio Free Asia has had to withdraw its service, and my understanding is that VOA has also had to reduce what it can provide as well.
I would assume that most people in Cambodia know that CNRP has been kicked out, right? In all the regions, everybody's aware of that. I would think they'd be highly inflamed about that and irritated. That's a program that we think is very effective. Anybody have a differing opinion?
Particularly in the heartland of the country, too, these outlets are extremely important.
Okay, and like I said in the beginning, what we see over and over again is the same thing is playing, the good versus evil. And I think it was 2.5 years ago, I was at I think you were there. It was a meeting with a lot of our active and retired generals, and they said that the world was going through a tectonic shift in superpowers or world powers that we haven't seen prior to World War II. And I think we're seeing this played out. I think China is in another phase. I don't want to say it's phase 2 or phase 3 of their grand scheme. And I see them putting pressure on countries around the world, in this instance in Cambodia. Wherever there is a democracy, they see that as a threat, and they have a hand in that. And if you see a democracy stumbling, falling, you can look at China is in the background. What influence, how much influence, in your opinion, has China invoked on the current breakdown of the free elections, of democracy, and the disbanding of the CNRP? If you guys don't mind, we'll just go through. Mr. Wallach, you can start. You look like you're ready.
Well, no, I just say that China has given a good deal of support. It is also, the Cambodian government has reciprocated, particularly
Sure.
in ASEAN forums, where they've blocked any effort to reach consensus on the South China Sea. It was interesting that China and Cambodia announced that they were going to set up a joint think tank to study color revolutions. Because this is the narrative that somehow the West was trying to instigate a color revolution and domestic groups were well. And I think if this think tank did accurate research, they would find out one very fundamental point, that the movements that rose up in places like the Philippines in 1986, in Kyrgyzstan, in Serbia, in Ukraine, in Georgia, were the result of one thing, and that was a stolen election. Movements rose up, starting with the People Power Revolution in the Philippines, because authoritarian regimes stole an election. It had nothing to do with outside intervention. And so I think it serves Cambodian interests and stability in the country, and in terms of China, its view of stability in the region, to have an election that's seen by the people of Cambodia to reflect their will.
Ms. Kim?
I don't think that China can replace the role of, for example, the EU or the US has on Cambodia's economy. China is not the one that's buying our products, and over 70% of Cambodian export depend on US and EU market. And I'm sure you have seen in other closed society around the world in the region, they can't survive on China's support alone. And then number 2, do you, meaning the free world, the US or the EU, do you sit back and allow China to go forward with the aggression? Or you fight for your space? Because it is in your interest as well, as I made my remark earlier, to stay connected in the region. I think Cambodia could be an easy case and a good opportunity for the US to take leadership in the region and to show that democracy can win. And it's very, very possible. I believe elsewhere in the region, it may be more difficult. In Cambodia, you just have to lift your finger. And I believe, again, I'm more optimistic than some of you. I believe that there's a lot of hope, and I think that it can be done very soon as well.
Ms. Enos?
I think China has consistently proven a bad actor in Cambodia, and that's evidenced by the latest statement by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, which affirmed Cambodia's decision to dissolve the opposition party. Not only that, but as Mr. Wallach referenced, in ASEAN, they had sort of a tit-for-tat agreement where Cambodia was, it looks like basically paid off in order to disavow the South China Sea resolution that ASEAN had made. And I think it's to the tune of $237 million in direct aid, $90 million in forgiven debt, and $15 million in other forms of assistance that they decided to give to Cambodia. So I think China has proven to be a consistently bad actor and sort of acts with sort of impunity and with total disregard to what's going on in Cambodia. But I would echo Mona's sentiments that I think apart from U.S. leadership, and this includes with forming the Paris Peace Agreement, you're not going to see substantive action being taken, because I think the U.S. needs to call upon EU partners, needs to call upon Japan and other signatories that have demonstrated an interest in seeing Cambodia get back on the track toward reform.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, China is pushing that because they want control of that region. And we see them with the power of, of the ASEAN nations. Just one nation can shut down the rest of them. And this is something we're looking at, talking to the ASEAN nations and seeing if we need to kind of see what we can do to put pressure on an individual nation that is doing this, because that was about $368 million that you said that gave them. Again, this comes down to, and I wanted to talk to you about, you were talking about the United States has to keep pushing and giving them and helping with democracies and that. I kind of take a different angle on that. I can't give you democracy. I can help you get it, but you have to have the want and the desire. It's like my mom wanted me to play the piano. For 7 years, my mom sewed and did all this extra stuff so I could learn to play the piano. There was a missing factor. I didn't have the want at that time. And so I know with the Cambodian people voting where they were winning these elections and the momentum was with them, to be robbed from that. You know, we have the Cambodian people that are pushing for this, and you have the Cambodian government that doesn't want it. Because what I've seen, you know, countries that are authoritarian, they're afraid of empowering their people. The most valuable resource any country has is their people. It's not their gold, their jade, or any of that other stuff. It's their people, and when you empower their people, they'll do well. Ms. Kim, you brought up that the EU, the United States, Canada, Japan account for roughly 78% of Cambodia's exports. That is a big hand that we can influence better decisions, and that's what our goal is. And I wish you the best of luck with your father, with the work you guys are doing. I can't tell you how much we appreciate your testimonies. This meeting's gone a little bit long, but everybody has stayed here, and that shows you the importance. Alan, do you have a follow-up? Any more comments? Dana? But again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, and it's like I said when I came up to the table, we take the information you give us, we look at different areas where we can give recommendations to the administration, the State Department, or a resolution coming out from the House saying we stand with these ideals and that we'll stand with the support of the Cambodian people. And then we'll also send the information to the Cambodian government that you either choose to do business with the United States of America following these principles that we've all signed on to, or you do business with somebody else. And I think it's time we start playing that hand, because we see the hand that China is forcing. And it's not in the favor of democracies. All right, so with that, this meeting is concluded. I appreciate everybody's participation, and have a great day. I read the resolution.